Hello and welcome to this Duke Fuqua session at the GMAT Club Essay Workshop. My name is Kirsty and I'll be your host today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shell from Dr. Shell Consulting and MBA Admit. In this session, we'll walk through the MBA essay for Fuqua step by step, offering you some practical insights on how you can prepare a strong essay. There will be time for Q&A after the presentation, so please submit your questions using the Q&A feature and feel free to upvote the questions that you're most interested in. So with that, let's get started. Dr. Shell?
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. And we're really excited about helping you understand how to put together a strong set of essays for Duke Fuqua. And so let's get started. Let's get straight into this discussion. First, I want to let you know that after this session, should any of you want to have a profile evaluation, so we let you know what we think of the strength of your candidacy, feel free to reach out to us at info@nbaadmit.com. And let me take a step back. My name is Dr. Shell Watts of Dr. Shell Consulting, the home of MBA Admit. I've been doing consulting for over 30 years, and we work with students applying to the M7, to the top 15, to executive MBA programs. We've had lots of success at all the top schools in the USA and abroad. So we're more than happy to work with you if you need assistance. I also wanted to let you know that as attendees, we are having a special discount. I'll go through this at the end, but just to let you know, you can reach out to us by April 15th for that. So let's just get started. I wanted to give some context first before delving into the essays. And the main thing that I want you to keep in mind as you're writing the essay content is that the school is looking for success in three main areas. Those areas are professional success, academic success, and success as a leader in the community. When someone has done varsity sports in college instead of, president of a club, that also can function in place of success as a leader of the community. But those are the three key places that they're looking for success within. So as you're drafting your essays, you need to keep that in mind because you're trying to showcase strengths in those areas. There is a fourth category, which is a strong personal story. Some people do have a really strong personal story that they want to emphasize. So again, if you're able to, you want to get that into your application. What you want to make sure to do is strategize and showcase, and that means assess so you understand what are the most distinctive things in terms of your successes and credentials, and then decide where you're getting that in, whether the essays, resume, application form, recommendations. And so you want to look at each application holistically. And again, once you know what your strengths are that you're trying to get in, figure out where you're going to get it in. And each application may be a little bit different about where you can get in. If there's not much essay content, you may not be able to get everything you want there in terms of showcasing the strengths, the resume, and the recommendations may need to play a bigger part in that scenario. So let's talk about the distinctive aspect about the Duke essay set. It has so much content, as you will notice, relative to some of the other applications. And that means you have a wonderful opportunity to make your case. And for those who have a weakness to override, it means it's going to be a little bit easier to do that because you can shine a light on all those other great factors that are strengths of your candidacy. So make sure to take advantage of that, particularly with the 25 random things essay. So let's start with the short essay. I start with this one before the random ones, just because you want to make sure you're not going to overlap too much in terms of what you're writing. So this first short essay is focused on careers. 100 words is very, very short. And so you have to be right on point as you answer this. And the question is, what are your post-MBA career goals? Share with us your first choice career plan and your alternative plan. So here is a sample essay. For the interest of time, I'm not going to necessarily read out every word. In some places, I'll summarize, but let's start with this short example. So 3 years ago, when I last returned to India, I spent time in an impoverished rural town. I was genuinely amazed by the dilapidated conditions that continue to prevail there. People in rural and remote areas still lack access to adequate sanitation, electricity, infrastructure, and education. Today, I dream of founding and growing a company that will have a profound social impact on emerging country populations lacking basic infrastructure and education. I can also see myself working at a high level in an existing organization with this focus. After my MBA, I plan to return to consulting to gain more experience before transitioning to lead a social entrepreneurial venture. Now, on the whole, this is not a horrible example. It's not a horrible essay, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. This particular candidate did have a consulting background, but they had absolutely no sort of history with working on things in terms of sanitation, electricity, infrastructure, or education. So for the admissions committee, it would look like that interest is coming from out of the blue. And then they're mentioning that 3 years ago, in one trip, this is what sparked that interest. But then they didn't follow up in any way. There's no sort of extracurricular, there's nothing within the professional arena showing that this was a sustained interest. And so therefore, it might lack credibility for the admissions committee. What the person would be best off doing is trying to build up somewhat in the extracurricular arena in the months that they have before applying. So they show a demonstration of that. If there's any way to get it into the professional profile, also a good idea. So that is one major weakness. Another weakness in this response is that they have a very big sort of swath here: sanitation, electricity, infrastructure, and education. That is actually quite a lot of different things. And so, again, it might give the impression that they really don't know that this is the area because they're talking about such a broad set of things, not necessarily closely related. And so, if they had, for instance, focused on sanitation and infrastructure, that might have made a little bit more sense. They're more closely related. And so be sure that when you're articulating your goal, that again is making sense from the point of view of the admissions committee. Um, in the second paragraph, it could be stronger in the sense that they talked about wanting to found a social impact organization, but they didn't really say how they were going to try to impact these areas. And so, what type of organization in particular? Is it going to be a nonprofit? Is it going to be something that's leveraging technology to improve infrastructure? So, again, the lack of clarity probably would not make this the strongest response for the committee. And then finally, even though this is very short, you want to try to get a little sense of why Duke would be the right place for them. And so I would be condensing some of this wording to open up the opportunity to bring in at least a sentence with very good details about why Duke would be a good place for this person to start to, prepare for this future. So those are some ways to correct this. And as you're writing, bear those type of things in mind. 25 random things. Now, I love this essay. And I do say love this essay because it again gives you such a great opportunity to override weaknesses if you really put together a really outstanding version of this essay. So I think most of you are aware of the questions. I won't read the entire thing here, but it's essentially, please share with us 25 random things about you. You have 750 words, and it's supposed to be in bullet point numbered 1 through 25. They don't have to all be the same length. Some can be longer, some can be shorter, but as long as you're, not going over that 750 word limit, you are fine. And so let's look at one example. So here we are. Again, I won't read every single point. I'll give you a flavor of it by reading on the first page, and we'll take a quick skim of the second. So here it is, number one. I love academics, AI, robotics, and root beer, an odd combination. I've been a pioneer at heart from a young age, and I built my own radio at the age of 5. I love trying and learning new things. I took a chance at cooking a new foreign food, Mexican street tacos. My friends said I did well. I enjoy writing poetry, practicing yoga, and square dancing. I visited Fuqua last year, and I most love the view in front of the main hall. I first tried pepperoni pizza 2 months after I relocated from India to the USA for college. While still in secondary school, I created 3 new dishes for my family's restaurant in India. I am thrilled by where AI and technology can take business in the next decade. My favorite movie is Back to the Future. I love classic Bollywood movies and hope to see more aired in the USA. I am adept at playing the guitar. The rest of this sample I'll sort of mention once here and there. I have friends from over 40 countries. Number 17, as a high school kid, my favorite subject was chemistry. Number 19, my first 5K marathon left me exhausted. Today, I relish every 10K. Number 23, my favorite color is green. 24, I love the smell of lemon. Okay, so you can skim over the rest of this and see that truly this is a list of random things. Now, for me, this is one of the things that is a mistake as people put this essay together, because end of the day, the purpose of the essay is to help you get into the school. And so you have to remember that. And as I said before, the three main areas they're looking for success within: professional success, academic success, success as a leader in the community. So you want to take the opportunity within this essay to showcase some of your strengths in those areas. And so I always advise candidates maybe spend about 10 of these points with truly random things, and some of those random things do have a little bit more value than others. And so again, they don't all have to be serving a strategic purpose, but some of them, even in the random ones, can. So for example, I have friends from over 40 countries. That is going to resonate well with the admissions committee because they're going to have a diverse set of students. They're going to want someone who enjoys meeting people from other places, who can build friendships. So that one actually does have strategic value, even though it is random. So with the other ones, say for example, if you're trying to present two that are academic, two that are professional, and then maybe four that are extracurricular. Say for the academic, you want to say something like, I graduated magna cum laude from college. Now that's the point you want to make, but you wouldn't make it that way in this essay because it's not appropriate for the tone of this essay. This essay should be lighthearted and it should be, casual. So that is just kind of to the point. It's too much to the point. So how you might introduce it is to say something like, I'll never forget the look on my mother's face as I walked across the podium and the college president called out my name and said magna cum laude. It was a great moment. Now that is, again, presenting it in a better way, but you're keeping front and center that academic credential. And you're also drawing them into a moment in your life. You're casting light on your relationship with your mother. And so that's a good way to present this. But you should be strategically thinking about, how do I get in a reminder of some of my best credentials, because you're trying to keep it front and center. Now, when you do it this way and then you mix them up well so that, you're not reading about all academic together or all professional together, mix it up really well, have some of the strongest ones at the beginning, this can be a really hard hitting essay. And so I believe that we override a lot of weaknesses with our candidates in the Duke application because of this essay and how well it can be and how impactful it can be. So really do put a lot of time into this essay. Let's go to the next. How will you contribute to Fuqua? Now, again, I won't read the entire essay. I think most of you have already read it. But let's hone in on the main thing that in the prompt here, they talk about their student-led government, clubs, centers, and events. And so you know that as you write your response, you should be referring to some of that. And so the basic question is, based on your understanding of our culture, what are 3 ways you expect to contribute to Fuqua? Now, this is an interesting thing because the wording is pretty open and you can interpret it one of 2 main ways. Some people, when they read 3 ways, they're going to name 3 specific things they're going to do. So they might say, I want to be president of the marketing club and I want to organize a symposium. And so they're going to name 3 things, and 1 paragraph will be devoted to each of those 3 things. Another way to approach it is to think of ways as a broad stroke where you're going to say, I want to be the leader of impactful clubs. And so it's a broader stroke that in the paragraph allows you to mention maybe 2 clubs and give a vision of what you're going to do for those 2 specific clubs. You'd still be specific about the clubs. You might also say, I want to play a big role in organizing networking events. Okay, it's a broad stroke. And so then you can name a couple different organizations through which you would do that and be specific. If it were me, I would tend to take the second option because it allows me to get more layers of what I'll be like as a student. But it is a personal preference and there really isn't one better than the other. So just know that those are 2 approaches to this. And let's look at a sample. Through an MBA, I aim to enhance my skills and knowledge to become an even more effective leader while also nurturing lifelong friendships. I will leverage my experience and expertise to make significant contributions at Fuqua. Professionally, as a consulting analyst, I have gained a deep understanding of how to help promote corporate success using AI and targeted metrics. I have many best practices to share at Fuqua through a role in a technology or AI focused club on campus, where I can organize impactful events such as a symposium. Clubs can offer great opportunities for students to exchange knowledge, and I look forward to learning from the diverse peers. They go on to give another sentence about, deepening relationships and foundations for a post MBA network. Working for top companies as a consultant, I have helped guide large scale companies to make corporate strategy and marketing decisions using excellent data and AI resources. And then they go on again to talk about helping create aha moments for the clients, and that they'll use this knowledge to in a club focus on consulting at Duke. And then again, they have some information about how that will help deepen relationships, somewhat repetitive of what they said in essay, I'm sorry, paragraph, the earlier paragraph. And so the last paragraph in this essay, they talk about having lived in an emerging economy in India and a developed economy in the USA, and how they can share this experience. They call it diverse experience. And they use a whole paragraph to sort of talk about that. Now, for me, this essay definitely could have been a lot stronger in multiple ways. I think this whole introductory paragraph is kind of wasted space. If I am going to have some of that, I would probably use about 50% of the space. So I'm keeping free words for more impactful information. The next paragraph, they talk about professionally as a consulting analyst, how they're going to use some of their expertise at the school, but they lost an opportunity to really keep front and center some of their great credentials. This person was at a very prestigious, like a top 3 consulting company. So keep that name in there. They should be naming that firm. They also then talked about, having learned about, corporate success and how to help promote that. But this person had worked for some Fortune 50 companies through their company. And so again, unless there's a confidentiality agreement, you would want to put some of those names in there, because the top schools do have a bias toward these large multinational global companies. So you want to keep that again front and center. They then talk about wanting to help with a club, but you should definitely take the time to go onto the Duke website and do your research and name a specific club by name. And by doing that, you're going to demonstrate, I've done my research, I'm aware of what's at your school, and this is how I see myself contributing. So the lack of a specific name indicates this is kind of a high level essay. Maybe they didn't actually do a whole lot of research before they wrote it. Going into the third paragraph, the same thing, they could have put some great names of companies there that were their clients. But there is repetition here. And so again, wasted words. So especially in this first top part on the second page, they kind of repeat things they said in the prior paragraph. And so I would have ended up cutting a lot of that to introduce more impactful information. And in this last paragraph, most people who are from India and spent time studying in the USA could have written the same paragraph. And so there's really nothing super distinctive about it. And so I don't think it was a good use of space. And so as you as a candidate put your applications together, you should know what are some of your most distinctive credentials. And this would have been a space to highlight one of those other ones, to talk about the success in that area, and then how that area allows you to then contribute to Duke. So those are definitely clear ways to improve this essay. The optional essay. Now, each school's different. Some schools leave it wide open and say, anything else you want to tell us, put it here. Others imply that it really should be about extenuating circumstances. So for Duke, they do kind of imply that it should be a very important reason why you're using this. They don't want just some new random essay. They didn't actually say only extenuating circumstances. So if someone actually had a very unique personal story they wanted to elevate, which is essentially a positive story, you're free to use it for that. But you're also free to use it for explaining, if you have a weakness, what happened, and try to get the admissions committee to overlook that weakness. So let's look at this next example. My college grades do not reflect my abilities. During college in India, unfortunately, I faced the burden of working nearly 30 hours weekly to help pay for my tuition and support my family. My ability to earn wages helped keep my family afloat, particularly during the COVID pandemic years. Additionally, I lived off campus and commuted to college, which made the long journey um, difficult for studying. I recall on many days after working such long hours, I had to take a nap for a couple hours to muster the energy to complete assignments. The person goes on to talk about the bus ride and how that was not conducive to studying. And then the last line, I hope the admissions committee will give me a chance to show I have the skills to thrive in your rigorous program. Now, for me, this essay is not strong. And the reason it's not strong is you can't change the past. And so don't spend the entire essay explaining the weakness. You should acknowledge the weakness, give an explanation as to why that weakness is there, and then redirect the attention to the successes. So you want to make it really easy for the admissions committee to see all the reasons why they should override it. So this person, why you should override it, they didn't actually lay out any of that. Okay, so they're leaving the work on the admissions committee to go back through the application. Do they see enough reasons to ignore this low grade issue? And so as a candidate, again, you want to acknowledge the weakness, explain it, and then immediately redirect, so that in this essay, you're spending at least half of it, if not two-thirds, laying out all the reasons, the other strengths that make you a great candidate, summarizing it for them so they don't have to do the work on their end. And that would be a much more persuasive essay. So this person thrived in the professional world. They were hired by a top company, which meant that the company wasn't concerned about the grades. They excelled, had promotions in the workplace, they had awards. All of that should have been part of this optional essay to persuade the admissions committee that they have a lot of wonderful credentials and that this weakness should not stand in the way. All right. In closing, before I get to the Q&A, I do want to just emphasize that you definitely should not see your essays as standalone, because the recommendations tend to impact the application as heavily as the essays. And the Fuqua recommendation really doesn't have a word limit because the last essay, the last prompt has no word limit. So you really can put as many words there as you want. So essentially, there is no word limit for the recommendation. And so you ideally would have 1,200 to 1,400 words. That's a solid recommendation. Above 1,400 can feel definitely too long. But take advantage of the fact that it's there and that you have an opportunity to get some great stories in that reinforce the themes that you've put forward. So work with your recommendation writers. Here at my company, MBA we do coach the writers. We review what they've written. We help them to focus in on the most impactful things that are aligned with the candidate's story. And so don't lose that opportunity. Some of you may have seen the recommendations, others not, but essentially these are the questions they're asked. The main ones are bolded. So how does the performance of the applicant compare to others? And then describe the most important constructive feedback that they have given you. The last prompt is open and there is no word limit. So lots of space to make a point. Strong points that support your application. There's also an assessment grid, and that is going to impact how the admissions committee sees you. There are 12 areas of assessment, and this is just an example of how detailed it is. So on this one, point 4, they are to rate you in terms of your influence and collaboration. And then they're going to choose one of these descriptions as to which one is most reflective of your skill level. The most impressive of them is always the last one. And so guide your recommendation writer about what you hope they'll do on this grid, because it is important. It's going to be the first thing that they see on the recommendation. So don't let that be something that you neglect in terms of making it a part of your application strategy. All right, again, so we're at the end here. Feel free to reach out to us if you would like a profile evaluation. The information is here, but mbaadmit.com. You can see our profile evaluation form there or send your LinkedIn address. And again, remember the special that we're offering. This is a very big reduction in our fees. And so it's only on until April 15th. So if you're interested, please reach out to us soon. All right. So we're open for Q&A at this point. So I know that, let me see if I can see those questions, but if not, I know that Kirsty is going to read out some for me. So let's just see. I don't actually see them. So Kirsty, feel
Okay.
free to ask questions as you like.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for the presentation, and I hope the audience felt that was helpful as they're preparing their essays. So we have some questions. Hopefully, more will come in, and they're not necessarily related to essays, but I know you're well equipped to answer them anyway.
Sure.
So the first one is I have a work mentor who is a Fuqua graduate and works with me closely and is more senior than me. Would this be more strategic than my current manager completing my recommendation?
Well, the whole thing is an alumni is nice, and sometimes you might want to have them send in an extra recommendation if they're not the ideal person. But you want someone, yes, superior to you and who knows your work directly. So the admissions committee wants to know it's an objective recommendation, and they want the person to have worked with you a lot. So you should choose the person who fits that criteria, who also know you're confident they're going to write a really glowing recommendation. And so just because the person's an alumni may not make that person the right person. If your current manager has better stories to tell, is going to tend to be more enthusiastic, maybe might even share it with you so that you're aware of what they're writing, that person might be a better choice. The alumni could be someone who does a second recommendation that, or even just a short note that goes into the committee in support of your application. So if you're not going to sacrifice content and the person does work with you a lot, then maybe you would consider that person. But being a Duke alumni is not the thing that would be the choice, what would make the choice.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question is how important is our LinkedIn profile in the MBA in MBA admissions?
Well, you definitely want to be aware on the whole of your social media presence because they may look you up. So any social media you have, take a look at it. What's the impression going to be? LinkedIn, I don't think is huge huge thing. The resume is going to be much more important because it's more detailed. But be aware and make sure that it's consistent with what's on your resume and make sure it's a good representation of your qualifications.
Okay, great. Um, then we have a question about an essay. So, how can I address a past setback or failure in my essay so it doesn't sound negative?
Are you talking? Well, I'm not sure if this person can respond to you. Are they talking about the optional essay or just in general?
That's a good question. They did not specify. So,
Okay.
maybe let's talk
Well,
about in general.
sure. Well, I always say don't introduce weakness or failure unless you're asked to. So if the question asks you to, then of course you do that. But this essay set doesn't really ask you to introduce a weakness or a failure, so I wouldn't do that. In terms of the optional essay, if there's a failure that's going to be obvious on your resume that they kind of will be aware of, and you feel like you need to address it, then you do that. But always the key thing with a failure. So my guidance always with a failure topic, if there is a failure topic in one of your essays for a different set, is that you introduce whatever the failure is, and then you explain what you learned. You focus on what you learned, and ideally talk about how you since then have applied those lessons again and again for success. And so if you're able to frame it in that way, then that's going to be something where they see growth and it will probably, hopefully, work against you less.
Okay, great. What are some typical areas where you see applicants struggle?
Um, there's so many ways. So it's hard to think of one particular way.
Yeah.
But I would simply say the lack of strategy, the lack of sort of really understanding what makes them distinctive and then highlighting that, because that makes a huge difference. When you write text that anyone else could have written, you're making yourself interchangeable and not distinctive. And so that could be the basis to not get through to the school. Another thing that goes wrong sometimes with essays is people are not specific. So they have these broad descriptions of why the school might be right. So they might be saying, you have such great, wonderful leadership programs, and I want your core curriculum. But you could have said that to any school. And so take the time to go on the website and really research the curriculum, be able to name courses by name special programs, and just demonstrate you really did your research. The more the school thinks you're taking them seriously and that they're not one of like 12 schools you're applying to, the more they have incentive to let you in, because obviously they want to admit someone, they want the person to accept so that they have a good matriculation rate. And so that's what I'd be saying, that that's another area. There's also the overlooking the recommendation. The recommendation impacts as heavily as the essays. And so if you have a sense that your direct supervisor won't fully support you, but you're still asking them, that's probably a mistake. And so it's better to just write about in the space provided why you didn't choose your superior. You could just say, I'm working more closely with this other person, but you want to choose someone who's fully going to bat for you, because one lukewarm recommendation or recommendation that has just one or two sentences that are negative is enough to close the door. So that's something you'd want to sort of avoid.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hopefully that answered their question. Is very thorough. Um, all right. Is communicating you want to explore career options in both consulting and marketing too broad or undesirable in Duke's short essay about post-MBA goals?
That is a great question. This is what I'm going to say. And I think there's may not be a definitive answer to this, but I know I've been doing this for so long, like 30 years, that sometimes when someone would bring an application to me that had been rejected somewhere, so I had not worked with them, but they bring me their application, they ask me to do a ding analysis. What I would tend to see a lot of times is that people have presented two goals and not just one. And so over time, I began to believe that indeed putting two that are not closely related can be the admissions committee can react negatively to that, because if someone else is putting forth a very strong, clear vision, that other person might be more preferable because they sort of feel the person knows more what they're doing. The unfortunate thing is that obviously a lot of people want to go to business school to explore, but when you're putting the application together, I always say the goal is get in the school. When you get there, you can do what you want. If you said, I want to do marketing, you get there and you say, I want to, launch a restaurant chain. You can do whatever you want to do. You can change. And so, but the point at this time is to get in the school. So I think focusing in on one goal is probably better. And then you want to make sure that it's not too far from what you've been doing, because if it is, it's okay to say something that's not related to what you're doing currently, but you need to lay out how your skills that you built up help you for that, and then how are you getting from where you are today to there. And it can't just be simply the MBA. You have to kind of paint a path of, after the MBA, this next step will allow me to get there. So the committee can see how do you get from where you are, which is not related as much to this goal you're talking about. They need to be able to see how you move from point, D to point M. So just always be careful. Goals are really important. You want them to be compelling. You want them to show the relationship of the prior work experience. And so if I were you, I'd focus in on one of them and not two. In the Duke essay set, they did ask for an alternative, but when you do the alternative, just don't make it wildly different than the prior. So if someone says, I want to be, as the example did, the person said, I want to launch my own company, I can equally see myself running an existing company. There's a kind of related, and the focus would still be the same. So it's not wildly different.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Kind of on a related, or at least about that essay, Shreya is asking, is the essay regarding post-MBA goals same as the SOP we write?
Statement of
But
purpose.
I'm guessing that's what it is. Yeah.
So could you ask that, say one more time?
Is the essay regarding post-MBA goals same as the SOP we write? I know.
Um, I think she's talking more broadly, not just necessarily about the Duke one. Um, I hope I'm interpreting the question correctly, but I would say yes, because when she's saying statement of purpose, that's making me think of the MIT application where there's like a cover letter. And essentially for that, yes, a lot of the content is similar to the goals essay.
Okay,
So
great. Thank
hopefully
you.
that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Can you shed some light on reapplicant strategy? I feel like that's a whole topic in and of itself, but I don't know if there's a couple little tips you can provide.
Well, the reapplicant, the key thing is to understand what went wrong. That's the number one step. And so make sure you have a very accurate assessment of that. Sometimes there was nothing wrong with the candidacy. The application itself was just not good, not strong. And so you just need to put a lot of effort into getting the presentation of your case through the application correct. Sometimes it could have been the recommendations. I mean, there have been times when I've done a ding analysis and someone brings me their application and everything looked sound enough that they should have at least gotten an interview. And so I would know at that point it's probably the recommendation. And so when they get a hold of the recommendations, we read them and indeed that was the problem. And so you need to know what the problem was. Now, sometimes there is a problem with the credentials. So maybe you didn't have a GMAT score that was high enough. So whatever the problem is, and this is the takeaway, is fix the problem. So as long as you can fix the problem, then you will have a high odd of getting a better outcome. And so if it's a low GMAT score, you try to get it higher. If you can't get it higher, you maybe take a course that demonstrates the quant skills that you need for MBA, and then you offer that. If your grades were low, that's the hardest one to fix because obviously it was a whole degree. But if you're able to go out and do a year's worth of courses, have it on a transcript, and it's much stronger, again, you're trying to fix the problem. If the application itself was not strong, you put everything in possible to make a strong essay set, work with your recommendation writers, make sure those are strong. So the key thing is figure out what the problem is, fix the problem. The good news is that if you fix the problem, the admissions committee normally look at the application with open eyes and they give you a whole fresh look. And so you're not going to be disadvantaged by that prior application. Now, and this is even how extreme it is. It can be is like, when someone has put forward a goal that was not the admissions committee feels is completely out of line with their work. It feels weird and odd, but if you change that goal to be something that's closer to what you've been doing, and you're reapplying the very next year with a wildly different goal, but one that's compatible with your prior story, the admissions committee will just ignore that first one and look at the new one. And yeah, I've had people have great outcomes because they just changed the goal to something that the admissions committee thought was more sensible. And a quick example would be I had someone who had been really successful at a top computer company, promotions, all this stuff. When she wrote her application to Columbia, she said she wanted to start a retail clothing line. And so the committee is like, you have no experience in retail or clothing. And so she got rejected. And so when she came to me with that application, I said, I know it's going to feel weird because she's applying the next year, but just change it to something consistent with what you've been doing. So she said, I want to, return to this computing company and do da da da. She gets into Columbia the next year. So um, that while a change, I always say the goal at this point is get in the school. Once you're in there, you're free to do what you want to do.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Um, all right, a couple questions about back to essays. Since it's generally advised to leave out high school accomplishments from the resume, would the random things essay be an appropriate space to mention these achievements from high school?
Um, it is a an acceptable place. And whether or not you mention something from high school, this is it part of your backstory? So if you're talking only about achievements, like I became a national chess champion or something like that. Maybe it's not part of your backstory, and so that would be appropriate for the 25 random things. But sometimes people have a backstory that they're going to bring in. And so it might make a space somewhere in the essay set besides 25 random things. But it obviously shouldn't be a whole essay. It might be a reference within an essay. That's something else.
Okay, great. Um, this one's a little more specific, but maybe you can make it more broad. I'm a
Sure.
chartered accountant from India, equivalent to CPA in the US. Graduation is not mandatory in India to complete a chartered accountancy. So, how should I put that in the essay or resume?
If there's an optional space, explain that, I suppose. And then and you may even try to reach out to the school to just see is that going to be problematic in any way, and that might help you understand how to address it.
Okay, perfect. Um, all right. Let's see. Muhammad's asking, I've worked with my current supervisor for just 7 months, while my previous one for over 5 years. So which amongst them is the most appropriate to use in a letter of recommendation?
Well, it's a broad question. It really would depend on how much the person with 7 months with experience with you has to say. But if the person who you had, sorry, I think I just lost me. If they had, 5 years of experience with you and it wasn't far back in time, so we're talking about your immediate past supervisor, that person might have better stories and more stories about your growth from when they first started working with you to 5 years later. So that might be a better choice. Um, in general, most people would probably go with the 5 year relationship person, and they would write in a space on the application why they did not choose the current supervisor. And the admissions committee would understand that. They'd understand, obviously, someone who's worked with you for 5 years has more to say in many ways. And so most people would probably go with the person with the 5 years. Again, as long
Hmm.
as it's great stories and they're fully supporting you.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have a few more minutes, so, and I know there's still quite a few questions. Maybe let's do a little bit of rapid fire.
Okay.
All right. How important is it to connect with admissions committees beforehand so they're familiar with you when your application is submitted?
Um, it's obviously nice to reach out and show engagement. So the schools call that engagement when you're reaching out to the school, either to the admissions committee, to student leaders, to going on visits, attending webinars. Engagement is always a good thing. And they're going to ask you about in the application form. Some of them ask you, in what ways have you sort of reached out to the school? And so that's all great. Now at the full-time level, there's a lot of candidates, and so the odds that you're gonna be on their radar screen in a big way is not super high. So don't overemphasize like how important that is for the full time, because um, they tend to not want to give you any, like at the executive level, they'll give you feedback on, the strength of your candidacy, should you apply? I mean, they give you very detailed responses. Full time is not that way. And so any discussion with them is going to be much more high level. They're not going to give you feedback on any weaknesses you might have, or if it's the right time for you to apply. That those conversations don't tend to happen. But again, in general, reaching out to the schools to show engagement is a good thing.
Okay, great. All right, time for about one or two more questions. Um, Ahmed is asking, is it not recommended to write about stories from before college, like childhood, to demonstrate traits and skills besides the 25 things essay? So should
Um,
you?
Again, the basis for getting in the school normally is professional success, academic success, success as a leader in the community. So those are the three big things. If a childhood story drives us to one of those success areas, then it could be perfectly fine to do that. So I'll give you an example. One of my more recent clients had a stutter, and so he told stories about, being teased and throughout elementary and going to, high school, having problems, having difficulty landing a first job, and then deciding he's going to overcome it, what he did to do that, and then thriving as a leader now at one of the top companies in the space of sort of music and technology. And so there was a place for that story, and it drove us to professional success. And so the story for its own sake may not help you advance to admission, but the story told to drive to one of those areas that they care about could be a very good strategic use of it.
Hmm. Okay, great. All right, let's take one more. Um, let's see. This one, how does the mention of my accomplishments made at my family run business reflect in an essay? Even though those accomplishments are not big enough, I would like to mention what I have learned there. Does this story have any credibility?
Um, that's kind of a broad question. So it really just depends on what the business was, how deeply you were involved, for how long, that stuff. But usually, my clients, I do showcase that sort of work experience because you're learning entrepreneurial skills. And so when you're in the classroom, you're drawing on that as much as you're drawing from whatever your full-time experience was. And so we normally do showcase it a lot of times on the resume. Whether it's going to make the essay just depends on what your whole array of strengths are. And so that's why the strategy is so important. You need to know what's most distinctive. So even if that's not the most distinctive enough to make essay space, it would be showcased on the resume. So And those skills are relevant because they're entrepreneurial. And as I said, you will be drawing on that in class discussions as you're making insights.
Hmm. Perfect. Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. I know there were questions we did not get answered, but feel free to reach out to Dr. Shell and get a free
Yes.
consultation. There's a discount right now. So I want to thank you all for joining this session on Fuqua, and a big thank you to Dr. Shell for your time and your insights. We hope this session was helpful, and we wish you
All
all the
right.
best of luck.
Yes, feel free to reach out and good luck in your application process.
All right,
All
thank
right.
you. Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Bye.